Hello, my name is Benjo, and I'm here to talk to you about an issue that's very close to me. Before I get into all that, I just wanted to give you a breakdown on what we will be talking about today. This discussion is on wellness, so I'm going to give you a bit of background on how wellness impacts our lives. Then, I'll get into the issue and my idea on how to work on solving it. What is the difference between being healthy and being well? Oftentimes these words are used synonymously, but they're not necessarily equal. For example, when we think of physical health, we often think of our physical being. We consider the ways we behave and the things we do to make ourselves feel good. Things like going for a run, going to the gym, or other forms of exercise. We might also consider the foods that we eat. The things we put in our body help us operate at a fully functional level. So getting a Big Mac at McDonald's is going to have a different impact than our fresh salad. We also might consider how we feel psychologically. This area is of particular importance to me because I'm a psychology major. We want to make sure our minds are working properly. We might also consider how we feel spiritually. How balanced am I? How do we find that inner peace? But what happens when these things are not in equilibrium? When we are sick, we go to a doctor to help us discover and cure our illnesses. When we're down or working through problems within ourselves, we go to a therapist. When we're seeking direction, we might go to a place of worship to reconnect. In any regards, when we aren't feeling 100%, we can agree that we all feel unhealthy. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that we are unwell. Wellness is more of an all-encompassing concept. Wellness is more of a balancing act between many different factors like psychological, physical, spiritual, environmental, social, and economics. These all play a role in achieving a state of wellness. So, how do we achieve a state of wellness? There aren't a set of parameters that determine our wellness level, and our standards for wellness change throughout time. For example, social practices over the years have shaped our ideas of wellness. Consider the idea of smoking. Where smoking stands in the realm of wellness has changed drastically over time. For example, smoking before the 1970s was seen as a glamorous practice. People believed that it contributed to their sense of social well-being, and people would smoke to fulfill a look that they thought would help them with their social lives. In turn, our idea of wellness has shaped social practices. Today, smoking is heavily stigmatized and not fitting of our idea of glamour due to the health ramifications that we've discovered as science has developed. And this trade-off occurs in many areas of life, such as diet and exercise, environmental practices, financial trends, and in the way in which we view ourselves when comparing to the media. Our examination of wellness takes place on many fields. We evaluate ourselves on many different factors of our lives to determine the degree of wellness we possess. We often think of wellness in terms of physical health, and that has its place under the umbrella of wellness. For example, the notion of what being physically well means has changed over time. From the 1960s to the current day, the ideal female body has gotten thinner and is gradually beginning to normalize at a healthier and fit body weight. A social idea, like beauty, can really help push people towards a healthier lifestyle, as we saw in the 1980s and today. However, that same idea can also lead towards some pretty dangerous lifestyles as well, like the notion of heroin chic in the 1990s. The push and pull of a social idea can be positive and negative. Another notion of wellness having both positive and negative outcomes derives from our concept of social well-being, striving for acceptance, and following social norms. Prior to the HIV/AIDS outbreak, gay sex was largely unprotected, frequent, and anonymous. With homosexuality outlawed across the country, there was little in the way of social movements surrounding gay men's sex health issues. The spread of HIV and AIDS led to the rush of fear and social movements. The government didn't seem to do anything to help the suffering population, and there were many people who would rather see us die than provide assistance. However, the outbreak led to safer practices and stigmatization against unsafe practices. Greater awareness of sexual activity can influence physical health. The sharp curve in sexual behavior patterns gave researchers time to develop treatment options for those already infected with HIV, and eventually it led to the development of preventative medicine. Interestingly, as technology advanced for HIV medicine, social acceptance of LGBT people also increased. These two things aren't necessarily related, it's just an interesting correlation. So now that I've provided you with some background on the idea of wellness and how it shapes our lives, I'll get into the reason I want to talk to you today. The issue I would like to discuss is the use of methamphetamines and other party drugs as a facilitator to sex. Methamphetamines and other party drugs, like MDMA, GHB, and LSD, are often used during sex to heighten the experience. To provide some perspective, 11.6% of people aged 18 to 26 report using MDMA, or ecstasy. 10.8% of people aged 26 and older report using LSD. Amongst gay men, drug culture is a prominent problem with the population. Gay men are more likely to use drugs than their straight counterparts, and are more likely to experiment with new drugs. In order to really understand this problem, we need to look at how it happens in the first place. To begin, there's an idea called velvet rage. Velvet rage says that people who have been exposed to oppression and bigotry are more likely to seek escapes once they find a safe place. I once had a friend who was kicked out of his parents' house when he came out to them. During his time at college, he began to spiral out of control. His parents wouldn't speak to him, and he turned to sex for validation. As time went on, he began experimenting with meth, and soon he became addicted. This is a prime example of what velvet rage does, and it can be really self-destructive. Another contributing factor is the glorification of drug use amongst the population. In the 90s and early 2000s, there were these massive parties held for gay men. They called them circuit parties. The lifestyle was full of beautiful men, and they were often on drugs. The cliques were exclusive, and guys idolized one another. These parties are more or less over, but the remnants of it still remain. Go to any gay club in West Hollywood, and you'll find attractive go-go dancers, often on drugs, being admired by everybody in attendance. Because of this degree of adoration, it should come to no surprise that drugs also contributed to the spread of the AIDS epidemic and its lingering hold on society. LGBT people are 90% more likely to experiment with drugs and alcohol, and they're more likely to develop a substance use disorder at some point during their lives. LGBT people are also more likely to develop other psychological issues comorbid with substance abuse disorders, like depression, anxiety, suicidal tendencies, and eating disorders. Given advances in social media technology, like dating apps like Grindr, Scruff, and Hornet, drugs have become more readily available. PNP stands for Party and Play, a phrase which most gay men find in messages and on profiles of the men trying to court them through these apps. Gay men have found a means of finding others of like mind to partake with, and it's relatively unmonitored and unyielding, which makes it much more prevalent in the environment and more difficult to avoid for those trying to recover. A popular web story outlet, Vice, recently has been covering the issue of drug culture among gay men, and it's garnered a lot of attention. It called out dating apps for making it easier to get drugs. Given the start of attention being given to this issue, it's likely that there will soon be campaigns to address the prevalence of drugs in the gay community. It's also likely that the companies that maintain these apps will be eager to participate in these campaigns, and will likely begin taking consumer reports more seriously and making permanent bans more frequent. So with all of this in mind, let's look ahead and formulate a plan of action from which we can work on reducing the number of gay men on drugs. One example of a campaign I would suggest to help with the LGBT population would be to implement a set of ads on dating websites. Some of these ads can be like Truth Campaign for cigarettes. detailing the effects of party drugs on the body and how it can influence all areas of wellness, including social, psychological, and career. Ads can also include helplines people can call if they're struggling with drugs and alcohol, as well as ads for rehabilitation centers. In addition to advertising campaigns, working closely with the creators of these apps can help create more of a stigma against using drugs in order to make it more challenging to find. Finally, a final strategy for helping gay men who are using party drugs would be to provide more community centers for them to reach out to with programs like NA, AA, and other community groups that cater to addiction. In order to implement this plan, I would work with the software developers and advertising companies in order to distribute information through these apps. Additionally, working with community centers, I would connect them with counselors and therapists in the area to work on psychological issues that may be contributing to their addictions. It'll help them build lasting bonds with other people. Finally, I would have people come in from the community to work with them to help them with their careers. This multidimensional approach will ultimately help create a dating environment that discourages drug experimentation, as well as a means for helping people who are already addicted overcome the physical, psychological, social, and career problems that contribute to their addiction. Eventually, with a well-executed plan of action, we can turn life around for someone who is struggling with addiction to help them find a more fulfilling, wellness-based life that will prove to be fruitful and lasting. Thank you.